welcome to this live reading from The Princess and the Pitbulls, the Fairy Tale Series Book 4 by Jody Lynn Daniels, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1, Chloe. I walked into the great room of Wonderland, my soon-to-be brother-in-law's ranch house with several dress bags over my arm. An embarrassed Jake, one of his favorite ranch hands, followed behind me with his eyes half closed, afraid he'd see one of the women waiting for their dresses in their underwear. "It's okay, Jake. No one is naked," I said as he almost tripped over the couch. He looked up and opened his eyes and blushed as he saw everyone wrapped in their robes. "Sorry, Miss Chloe. I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable," Jake said as he sat the boxes down by my feet and smiled. "Anything else you ladies need?" "Just go get ready and look adorable as always," Lynn said as she patted Jake on the shoulder as he left the room, his cheeks bright red as he snuck a glance at her. Jake had a small crush on her, but he was too young for her taste. She wanted an older, more secure man. She was an employee and mother to my new 5-year-old niece's best friend, Stephen. "Okay, ladies, everybody's dressed and their accessories are in their own marked boxes," I told the happy group of women. "Maggie, Sasha's dress is in with yours." I smiled as everyone grabbed their boxes, except for my sister Abby. Her large garment bag was draped across the couch on top of her box. We turned the great room into a large dressing room that would accommodate the entire bridal party, with makeshift curtains set up to block the windows and to serve as temporary walls. "Where's the bride-to-be?" I asked, just as I heard the flushing of a toilet as she came from the other side of the curtains. "I had to pee for the millionth time this morning. I'm back," Abby laughed, and then looked at the large garment bag. "Is that my dress?" "Yes, sister dear, this is your dress. Are you ready?" I asked as she walked up to me and wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug. "I've waited for this moment all of my life. The fact that you made my dress makes it so much better." I smiled and pulled back, then dabbed at my eyes. "Okay, let's not get mushy just yet. I want my mascara to make it to the actual ceremony." The women all gathered around as we unzipped the garment bag, and we held the dress up for her to see. Abby smiled and looked giddy as she examined my work. The country-inspired dress was exactly what she'd asked for. It was a white halter-top knee-length dress. Its bodice had small coral Swarovski crystals sworn into it for sparkle, just like Abby's personality. It had a detachable train for the ceremony that almost hit the ground, and she could remove it for her first dance at the reception. Her designer white and coral cowboy boots had matching crystals on them in the butterflies that adorned the stitching. She had the best of both worlds, designer and country, a perfect blend of Abby and Logan. "Oh my God, Chloe, it's so beautiful. You've thought of everything. It looks exactly like the sketch you drew for me." She smiled and looked at the bridesmaids' dresses that were the same exact coral in the crystals in her boots. She hugged me again as she tried not to cry. "I'm glad you like everything. I wanted everything to be perfect for you. You deserve it after all those care packages you sent me in New York. They made me feel like I wasn't alone. I needed that." I wiped at my eyes as we hugged, then composed ourselves as we heard the door open and looked to find our mother rushing toward us in tears. "My beautiful girls, you make me so happy," she said as she kissed Abby and I on the cheek lightly, careful not to leave her signature red lipstick on us. "Come here, Ella. That means you too." I smiled as Ella walked over and stuck out her cheek and smiled as she got a peck too. We'd come full circle. My mother and my stepsister were getting along, and today I was gaining another new brother. "Do I smell donuts?" Abby asked as Mother smiled and handed her a basket full of sour cream cake and blueberry donuts. "I thought everyone could use a snack before the ceremony," Mother said as she laughed at how fast Abby swiped the basket of treats and did a happy dance over them. "You mean I have to share?" Abby took the basket and gave a low growl, then laughed as she took a donut and offered us one. "Hey, the baby likes Ella's donuts." I watched my mother, who had made such a change in her life in the last year that she was almost unrecognizable. She'd went from a scheming, judgmental woman who only prized men for their money and status to a loving mother who worked for my sister in her bakery and loved being a grandmother. She still kept her signature style and red lipstick, but her tastes were less expensive and more sensible nowadays. "So do we," I said as everyone grabbed a donut and munched as they got dressed, except for Abby, who ate the leftovers, a large glass of milk, and burped loudly for good measure. "Abigail!" Mother shouted, her expression one of mock disgust as she sat on the arm of the couch, then stared at Abby. "Excuse me," Abby answered as she covered her mouth and laughed, getting a swat on her behind from her mother. That's my sister. Sebastian. I drove out the long dirt road to a new client's ranch called Wonderland. I'd been invited to his wedding and was anxious to meet them and get the chance to work with his horses. I'd heard about his new foal and of his parents' lineage, and I was anxious to see him. I trained to work with horses. Maybe now I would get my chance. I'd just taken over a small veterinary office, and Logan Carson and the animals on Wonderland were the first clients I'd met. I arrived a little early and wandered around, exploring the layout of the ranch and all the animals. I'd been approached by a tall, gangly-looking young man named Jake to make sure I wasn't a weirdo, then left to wander before the ceremony after I assured him I was an invited guest. I walked into the stables to see the horses and found a man talking intently to a horse until he heard me come in. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, I said as he looked embarrassed by my presence. It's okay, I probably look ridiculous talking to a horse like this, he said as he rubbed the horse's snout. Not at all, I said as I walked up next to him, rubbing the horse's neck as it snorted at me. I talk to all my animals, nothing weird about it at all. Good, then I don't feel like a fool. I'm Logan Carson, this is my ranch, and this is Sasha's ghost. Pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Carson. I'm Sebastian Adams. I took over for Dr. Williams after he retired. I took his hand in a firm shake until we both turned at a feminine voice behind us. Logan, shouldn't you be getting ready? I looked and saw a short woman with a very stern-looking expression with her hands on her hips as she looked from Logan to myself. Well, are you coming? I looked at Logan and smiled, then watched as he grabbed his Stetson and put it on. Yes, ma'am. We both echoed as she stood at the door and waited. I started to speak until she gave me that look. The same look every grandmother gives a naughty child as she is debating on their punishment for being naughty. I followed behind Logan, nodding at our warden as we were passing her. She pointed at me and studied my face. You, I don't know. Go take a seat. Logan, go finish getting ready. But first, both of you wash your hands so you don't smell like horse. I laughed and followed Logan inside, washed my hands quickly, and went out to claim a seat before the warden caught me dragging my feet. Well, it's been a fun day so far. Wonder what else will happen. Chapter 2. Chloe. The bridal party stood in the great room, ready to walk out and get this wedding started, but we were on our fourth pee break in a half hour. Clearly the large milk and bottle of water was a bad idea before the ceremony. Finally, Abby came out of the bathroom looking relieved and ready. You think the little one will let us get you down the aisle? I asked as my older sister waddled towards me with the biggest smile I've ever seen on her face. Yes, I think he or she is ready for her daddy and I to say I do. Abby took my hands and smiled, and gave me the biggest hug, then looked around the room at everyone. Shall we, ladies? I asked as everyone grabbed their bouquets, straightened their dresses, and made last-second fixes to their hair. I and the rest of the bridal party wore halter-top, knee-length bridesmaid dresses in pale aqua, and all of us had on matching cowboy boots with aqua inlays in the stitching. Mother and Aunt Anna both wore simple aqua lace dresses to match the wedding party. Abby looked beautiful in the wedding dress I designed for her. It was a halter-style knee-length white lace dress with Swarovski crystals and aqua in the bodice. When the light hit the crystals, they sparkled, almost as bright as her smile ever since she had met Logan. Jake and Elwood came and escorted us to our waiting area behind a large white partition so Logan couldn't see his bride until she walked down the aisle. I peeked around the partition and saw Logan looking nervous as he waited for my sister. After everyone was settled, I gave the musicians their cue to start the procession. The cannon played as the procession of bridesmaids and groomsmen made their way down the aisle. The bridesmaids looked stunning in their aqua lace dresses and white cowboy boots. The men were all dressed like Logan, dark gray pants, white dress shirt, and gray vests. Each one had on cowboy boots and hats to match as well. They all had aqua-colored boutonnieres to match the aqua in the dresses the women wore and looked very handsome. Logan had chosen Nicholas for his best man, with Jake, Elwood, and Carson as groomsmen. I could see the women in the room getting misty-eyed, especially my mother as she waited for her daughter to take her vows. I wasn't sure why, but I was so nervous. The butterflies in my stomach felt more like dragons in a UFC match. After a few minutes, the ladies were all on their way down the aisle. I turned and gave Abby a big hug and dabbed at her teary eyes. I love you, sis. See you both at the altar. I said as I patted her round tummy and started my walk. I heard giggling behind me as Anna sent Maggie's daughter Sasha down with her best friend Stephen as our ring bearer and flower girl. They had everyone smiling and giggling as they laughed and walked quickly down the center aisles, stopping to stand in their places. I laughed as I watched Stephen give Logan a thumbs up and tipped his cowboy hat to him. He was a handful, and Sasha and he were inseparable. I smiled at Logan, who looked at me and exhaled deeply as the music worked into the song Abby chose for her walk down the aisle. From this moment. Logan stood and waited for the sight of his bride, his anxious smile growing as she walked from behind the partition. She looked amazing. The gown fit perfectly, well, after being let out to cover her growing baby bump. Her smile was radiant as she looked at her soon-to-be husband. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I watched her taking the most important walk of her life. My big sister was getting married. I can't wait to get married someday and have a baby and start my own family. Our mother was arm in arm with Abby, walking her down the aisle since our father had passed away years ago. I'd never seen my mother look happier, genuinely happy for her daughter's happiness. It had been a couple years of adjustment since she'd lost everything, and she'd come out the better for it. Abby looked at me and smiled, her free hand gently rubbing her belly as she walked. I've never been more jealous of Abby. She's marrying a great man who loves her and is carrying their baby. I snapped out of my haze when the music stopped and Abby was at the altar. Ella grabbed my hand and gave me a squeeze. I looked at her. She was a wreck just like I was. After Mother gave her away, Abby smiled and turned and handed me her bouquet and took Logan's hand to begin. Logan looked so happy and a little nauseated. His face was pale and his hands shook slightly as he held her hands in his. After all, it was a huge step in life to devote your life to someone forever. I want this much love and happiness. I wonder if I could have had this with Bradley. I know we haven't been seeing each other but a month, but he would make a handsome husband. A girl can dream, right? Sebastian. I watched as the bride walked down the aisle to her soon-to-be husband. Everyone looked very happy and completely in love. I was a stranger at the wedding, but it felt very comfortable here. I can see why Logan and Abby love it here. Their home was beautiful, as was the maid of honor. The women in the bridal party were stunning. The bride in her long black hair and swollen baby bump looked absolutely glowing. Several other beautiful women were lined up next to her, but the younger beauty with wavy blonde curls with flowers in her hair had my undivided attention. She was of average height except for the 2-inch boost from her cowboy boots. Slender yet curvy build filling out her dress exceptionally well. Her long blonde hair was reminiscent of Rapunzel's and was set off with the pink and purple rosebuds wrapped around her head like a crown. But it was her smile, the quivering lip as she looked at the happy couple getting married. I heard someone in front of me whispering that she was the baby of the family, Abby's little sister. I wonder if she's single. I was looking at her more than the bride and groom when she turned and caught me. I was conflicted with the expression I got. She was crying and dabbing at her eyes as she made eye contact. The few seconds that I held her gaze were amazing. I could barely watch the ceremony in hopes that she'd look my way again, until I was not so gently poked in the side by the woman sitting next to me that wasn't there seconds ago. She smiled at me, then pointed towards the altar. I nodded and looked ahead as the happy couple said their vows, and the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and everyone cheered. Beautiful couple, aren't they? My new friend asked. Yes, they are. They look very much in love, I said as everyone clapped as they made their way down the aisle. You don't know them? She asked as she wiped fresh tears as the bride passed her. I just met Logan earlier. I'm the new veterinarian in town. He invited me to come meet the family and see my new patients. That's nice. A doctor, she said, grinning as I offered her my hanky. Yes, ma'am. She stood to walk away and looked at me and grinned and held out her hand. I took it and smiled back. I'm Anna. I'm the nanny for the bride's sister, Isabella, she said as she pulled back her hand. Oh, okay. I'm Sebastian. Nice to meet you, Anna. She's married? Damn. Nice to meet you, too. And her name is Chloe, she said, pointing to the young blonde I'd been staring at. And she's single. She patted me on the shoulder as she walked past me, joining everyone who went to the large tent set up for the reception. I followed everyone else, smiling when the music started playing. Yes, maybe I'll be lucky enough to snag a dance with baby sister.